We're a few minutes past the hour, and so we'll go ahead and get started. Really excited to be here, and I know people will be coming in, and so no worries at all. This is going to be a very informal talk. This is sort of a new format for the convention, where we're giving sort of short talks with nuggets of information, and then a lot of time for people to ask questions. And so hopefully there'll be some good back and forth. We have prepared a couple questions just in case, but I think we've got enough people here that we should have a lot of good questions here. So I'm really excited to be here. My name is Andy Duker. I am the director of the Huntington's Disease Society of America Center of Excellence at the University of Cincinnati. So I'm really pleased to be here. Yes. Very pleased to be here to talk to you guys today, and I'm here with Aaron Lasker, who is the director of the Center of Excellence at the University of Pennsylvania. And so we are going to be talking to you about how to handle difficult behavior in Huntington's disease. And certainly I'm going to put a disclaimer, and probably Aaron would as well. We are not psychiatrists, but we play them on, no, we don't play them on TV. We work closely with psychiatrists in our Huntington's clinic, and we have lots of experience dealing with behavior as neurologists as well. So we're going to do sort of an overview of kind of the different problems that can be. We're going to be focused on a couple of these, irritability and apathy, but then there's going to be lots of time for questions about the different kinds of problems that we can see. All right. So, as always, remember that this is for informational use only, and we want to hear from you. So, just as in all the other sessions, please snap a photo of this code and complete the survey for the workshop. We want feedback. Tell us what I did wrong, tell us what Aaron did right, and that way we can make it better next time. All right, so I don't think I have to explain a lot of this to the people in this room, but just to remember, to give some background, we know that Huntington's disease affects lots of different systems in the brain. It affects the motor circuit, which causes abnormal involuntary movements like chorea and dystonia, which are the twisting postures, coordination balance difficulty, reaction time. Those are all part of the movement symptoms of Huntington's disease. In addition, there's effects on the thinking and memory circuits, the cognitive circuits. And so that can cause difficulty with memory. It can cause difficulty with understanding what has actually happened to the person. There's a phenomenon called anosognosia, where the person who has Huntington's disease makes it very difficult for them to realize what the symptoms are and how they're affecting their lives. And then, of course, there's the behavior and psychiatric difficulties, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. These are just a few of the behavioral issues that we will see sometimes in our clinic and that people with Huntington's disease deal with every day. You guys know this more than we do. Depression, obviously, is a big one. Mania, irritability and agitation, apathy, compulsiveness, psychosis that can cause hallucinations or delusions. Perseveration, which is when you kind of get stuck on a loop in your head and you kind of have trouble getting out of that loop. You may ask the same question a couple times in a row. Disinhibition and anxiety. These are just some of the things. And so these yellow ones are the two that we're going to be focusing on today, but we'll have time for the question and answer session to address any of these other ones. All right, so hopefully you guys have seen this movie, Inside Out. What is irritability? So irritability can present as anger, impatience, anxiety, or aggression. It can occur intermittently, or it can be there all the time. And a lot of times the irritability in Huntington's disease can react to a stressor in a way that's sort of out of proportion to the situation. For instance, your child leaves a toy on the floor and you trip over it. And normally the response is, and you might scold the child. But if you have irritability, you might pick that toy up and throw it at the wall and damage the wall and scream at the child. And so that irritability can really have significant effects on the family dynamics. The person with Huntington's disease may not be aware of their irritability. They may feel that it's actually justified. They say that toy should not have been there on the floor. And yes, the toy should not have been on the floor, but you have to find the balance of the response. And it can cause conflict with family and sometimes even isolation. So what makes a person with Huntington's disease irritable? Well, remember how the brain is set up, the frontal lobes? These are considered the brakes of the brain. So this is a picture of a brain with the little calipers like the bike, right? And so those brakes are what hold a person back from making irrational decisions. They enable the person to sort of reflect on what are going to be the consequences of this decision. If I throw the toy and hit a person, what are the consequences of that decision? And so those brakes are not working as well as they should be in Huntington's disease, and that can cause some of the irritability. How do we decrease irritability? So the most successful strategy to help to decrease irritability is to figure out what is the trigger. So let me give you an example. Martin, not his real name, would always become irritated and agitated around the same time every afternoon. He wanted to take the trash out from the house to the curb. And his wife said, Martin, don't you remember that the trash only goes out on Wednesdays? But Martin wanted to take the trash out every day at the same time. And he would get very agitated and irritated when he wasn't allowed to do that. So the solution was Martin's wife decided, let's make a routine out of it. It's okay, we'll take the trash out to the curb at 3 p.m. Every day, even though it's not time for the trash to go out. And that actually helped to diffuse the situation and helped to remove that trigger that was causing the irritability. What are some other triggers that we can see that can trigger irritability? Well, depending on the person's abilities to communicate and things like that, they may not be able to communicate the cause of their irritability. So sometimes, you got the Snickers commercial, right? You're hangry, and you don't realize that that's what's causing you to be irritable. Someone could be hurting or in pain and not able to express that, and that can cause irritability. Just the fact that you can't communicate itself can cause irritability. Getting frustrated or just bored, where you're just not able to do the things that you're used to doing, and that can make you frustrated and irritable. And then, just as we saw with Martin, there's a routine, and sometimes a change in the routine can really set things off. So we want to look for those triggers and figure out how can we work around them. Just an aside, safety first, right? So sometimes people with Huntington's disease can become irritable, not just emotionally, but physically. And if you're trying to de-escalate a situation, trying to bring things down, and if it's not working, sometimes you need to leave the situation. You always want to make sure that the situation is safe, that no one's going to get hurt, and you have to sometimes help to diffuse the situation in that sense. Very rarely, if a person is in danger to themselves or to others, sometimes you do need to get external help involved, whether it's family or friends or sometimes the police. That's just a reality that can sometimes happen, and you want to be aware of that so you can be prepared. You don't have to press charges, but if there's a situation that's of that caliber, you may need extra help. All right, let's think of another example. Another patient, Ronald, again, not his real name, he lived alone in an apartment nearby to his grandmother, and he started to become irritable and agitated, and he would constantly come over to his grandmother's place, even though she was busy, and she would get a little upset and would ask him to leave, and he got very irritated and angry when he was asked to leave. So we tried to figure out what is the trigger that was causing this irritability, and it turns out after we talked to him that he was very concerned that the FBI was monitoring him and tracking him on his phone, and he was afraid to be alone, and that's why he wanted to be with his grandmother. We found out that he wasn't taking his medication. We were able to admit him to the hospital. We got him started on a long-acting injectable medicine that helped to resolve his delusions, which were the main trigger of his irritability. We were able to reduce the irritability. So the title of our talk, managing behavioral symptoms in Huntington's disease, it takes a village. Well, this is really the focus of the Centers of Excellence, right? And just HD care in general. You have to have a team of people that are going to be taking care of this situation. And so who's in the village and how can they help? Well, the person with Huntington's themselves and their family. They know the situation. They know the background. They know what the potential triggers are. They know what's feasible and what's not feasible for their particular situation. They have to be part of the equation. You want to potentially get help from a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Explore in more detail those causes and triggers that could be causing the irritability. Look at medications that potentially could be helpful if the symptoms are not able to be managed by behavioral modifications. The neurologist, we can be helpful to look for medications and potentially side effects and make sure that the movement part of things is going okay. A really key part here, the HD social worker and the HD nurses. They know what resources are available in the community, and they can sometimes serve as an impartial perspective on the situation. So they can talk to the people that are involved and try to give feedback as to what might be helpful. And then don't forget about your HD support group. That's why they're there. You are not going through this alone. Others are having exactly the same problems, and they will often have tips and strategies that you didn't think of. And so you're only going to find those out by talking about it and sharing with other people. And so that's really key. Physical and occupational therapy. We know that organized physical activity plays a really powerful role in reducing the symptoms of Huntington's disease. And it can give a constructive outlet. Regular exercises can help to give more structure, and this also can become part of that routine, which can really be helpful. Speech therapy can also be helpful because a lot of times, as we were talking, communication issues can lead to the frustration and can lead to irritability as well. So that was just a very short discussion about irritability. And next I'm going to have Dr. Lasker come up. He's going to talk to us about apathy, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. Good, so save your questions both for irritability and apathy at the end, and we can have a chat. So I'm Aaron Lasker. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. I'm the Center of Excellence Director there, and I'll talk about apathy. So same disclosures. I have no relevant financial disclosures myself, and the same QR code that you've seen. So we do want your feedback. We want to make improvements. Yeah? Oh, I'm sorry. Better now? Better now? A little louder. If I speak up, or can you turn up the volume? All right. Better. Good. Yeah, better? All right. So here's the outline of what we're going to talk about. So we'll talk about what apathy is, a little bit about what we think causes apathy in Huntington's disease, what apathy is not, things that might be confused with apathy, and then talk about what we can do about it and go through the same sort of team-based perspective on how to deal with it. So apathy's been defined in a bunch of different ways over time. I really like this definition. So apathy is a reduction in motivation and goal-directed behavior. So this both takes the sort of subjective experience of the patient into account and what might be observable to people around them. So for patients, they experience a lack of motivation or a reduction in motivation and doing things that they used to like to do, and those around them would notice that there overall is a reduction in their otherwise goal-directed behaviors and behaviors that they would normally do to achieve some certain goal. Apathy is common in Huntington's disease, so even people who have not yet developed symptoms, about 25% of people with pre-manifest Huntington's disease can have apathy, and 50% or more of people who have manifest Huntington's disease will experience apathy. And apathy also is one of the more predictably progressive symptoms in Huntington, so not everything necessarily gets worse over time in HD, but for those people who have apathy, it does very predictably get worse over time. So it's an important and challenging symptom to manage. So what do we think causes apathy? So there are a few different ways to think about this and a few different brain networks that are involved that we think probably cause apathy. I'm going to talk about two of them today, which I think are helpful sort of frameworks to think about this. So one is the reward pathway. So in this image, we see a couple of different systems that exist in the brain. These two systems both use a brain chemical called dopamine to facilitate their messages. And the system in green is the motor system. So we know this is involved in HD and causes the motor symptoms of HD. And then the pathway in red is actually the reward pathway. So it gives you that sort of internal reward, internal positive feedback when you do something of value. And this is dysfunctional, it doesn't work properly in Huntington's disease and can lead to apathy. So a good example, sort of a thought experiment to think through what this would be like. We've all had the experience, or certainly I have, where the alarm wakes you up in the morning and you just don't want to get out of bed. For people who aren't experiencing apathy, we know that getting out of bed is the right thing to do. You want to provide for your family, you have stuff to do, and knowing that that reward is going to be there for you helps you motivate to get up and get out of bed. And when this system isn't working, that positive feedback, the positive reward isn't there, and so patients don't have the motivation to do the activity. Another way to think about it is through this concept of the salience network. So this is a busy slide. The details here don't matter too much, but this is just sort of a pretty pictorial way of depicting that this network, sort of in the bottom right, is dysfunctional, isn't working properly in Huntington's disease. And so the salience network is really interesting. It's a group of different brain regions that work together to assign relevance or importance of information. So every time you see something or you have a thought, your brain actually has a mechanism to decide how meaningful, how relevant is the information, and basically answer the question, should I pay attention to this or not? And this isn't working properly in HD and can lead to difficulty with motivation because the things aren't assigned relevance or importance. So another sort of thought experiment to think about how this would affect you. You could imagine if you're in the kitchen and you're warming up some pasta sauce on the stove, and all of a sudden the sauce starts bubbling over onto the stove and your phone rings and someone knocks on the door, and you have to decide, what do you do first? So someone who has a fully functional salience network would know to go and turn off the stove. But someone who's affected by HD may have difficulty trying to decide which of these things are most relevant because the system isn't working quite right. So you can imagine how that would have an impact on potentially creating apathy. So I think these are both useful sort of frameworks with which to think about apathy. So what is not apathy? What sort of might be confused for apathy even though it isn't? So I'll talk about just a couple here. So one is depression. So for sure, people who are suffering from depression can have apathy as a symptom of depression, but in Huntington's disease, apathy can happen independent of depression. So you can just have apathy as a manifestation of HD on its own without depression. And usually for most people, we can differentiate between the two by asking patients about their mood. So if a patient seems to be behaving in a way that looks like they're depressed because they're not engaging in activities that they used to like or they used to do, you can ask about their mood. But if they're saying that they're not feeling depressed, they're not feeling sad, and they're able to communicate that well with you, they may be suffering just from apathy and not also from depression. People who are suffering from depression, it should be treated, and it's a good sort of opportunity or an avenue for treatment. So this might be maybe the most important slide in my slide deck, that apathy is not laziness. So this isn't an intentional choice. Patients aren't being lazy. This is a symptom of HD and a consequence of real neurobiological changes that we discussed previously. And this can be really challenging for patients and families because patients might be able to still physically do the activity. They might, be able to get to the gym or to change their clothes, but they're having trouble just generating enough motivation to actually do it. And that can really create tension and is quite challenging. But it's important to remember that it's a distinct symptom. It's from the Huntington's. Okay, so now armed with that knowledge about what apathy is and what we think causes it, what it isn't, what can we do about it? And we'll do a team-based perspective. So first I'll have a break for comedic relief for those of you who can read it. Unfortunately, we haven't found a cure for apathy, but there are a lot of strategies that we can use to try to manage it. So to give you guys the best information, I went around to all of our excellent team members at our HD Center and asked people their opinions of sort of what their top recommendations are for families suffering from apathy. And I tried to take the best one or two from each person to bring to you, so I'll just sort of go through them with you. So a good place to start is our neuropsychologist. So she recommended that folks keep a calendar of events and activities for the patients to do and to make it really specific. So it's really important for patients to know what to expect, to know what's coming. And basically what we're trying to do here is use an external structure to compensate for the lack of internal motivation. So can we provide enough external structure for someone that they're able to do the activities that they do want to do but just don't have the motivation to do it on their own? She recommends making it brightly colored, large, and putting it in a really central place in the house, so like in the kitchen or something like that. Our therapy team recommended had a lot of excellent advice. Our physical therapist recommended some specific categories you could put on the calendar, maybe have each one in a different bright color to sort of coordinate it for the week. And those included things like self-care, things that involve social interaction, which are so valuable for brain health. Physical exercise, which could be something formal like going to the gym, but could also be informal like dancing in the living room or doing yard work or going for a walk. And then this term, which I have come to love now, leisure exploration, which I think is great. And she recommends trying to keep people engaged throughout the day if you can. Our speech therapist recommended trying to give people simple choices when you're trying to decide how to fill their time. So ask like yes or no questions or very few choices rather than open-ended questions. So like ask, do you want lasagna for dinner rather than what do you want for dinner? And that's a lot easier for patients to engage with. And our occupational therapist gave some specific recommendations, maybe in that leisure exploration category. Things like looking through old photo books to reminisce, simple craft activities like using Play-Doh, finger painting, coloring, simple physical activities like playing with a ball, audiobooks, podcasts, any games, especially ones that might facilitate social interaction are all great. Our excellent nurse coordinator had actually pages of recommendations. I tried to simplify down to just a couple of really good ones. And the first one I thought was subtle but so valuable, which was building downtime into the calendar. So it's important for patients to know what to expect and plan it. It's also important to know that there are chunks of time where they don't have to feel bad not doing things, and sort of being structured about your unstructured time is how I would think about it. So I think that's really valuable. And the other was to pick your battles. So try to decide for each individual activity, is this something you need to win? So this came up relatively recently for a family of ours where the patient didn't want to go out of the house, but also didn't feel like getting dressed, was having trouble motivating to get dressed in the morning. And so basically we had to try to decide and help the family navigate, is it worth sort of giving up on the battle of getting out of your pajamas in the morning in order to get her to, social events and family events, or is the pajama battle one worth winning? So sort of thinking through that and asking yourself sort of which battles are worth fighting over. Our social worker made some recommendations, one of which was looking into local day programs in your community. Often communities have already set up programs to help facilitate some of these activities, and they're already set up and established in your community. And this can be really helpful because it provides social stimulation. It often physical activity might be involved, and it gives care partners some much needed time to sort of recoup and care for themselves as well. And then the other is to start with really small habits and build from there. So the idea here is, instead of using sort of an external framework to try to compensate for the loss of motivation, can you get into a habit and then have the sort of the habitual nature of the habit actually help compensate for the lack of motivation? So exercise is a good example of this. Can you, for a month, just do 5 minutes of exercise every day? And we know from a lot of research, it takes about 30 days to establish a new habit. So if you're able to do just a little bit every day for a month, then the next month should be a lot easier to keep up with that habit and sort of continue to build it. Another member of our team, our spiritual counselor or chaplain, recommended what she calls legacy work, so sort of looking back on your own personal legacy and your family legacy as an activity and an internal motivator. Sort of asking, this could be something you do by yourself or with family, loved ones, what gives your life meaning now, and trying to focus on that. What have you accomplished, and what could you still accomplish, and focusing on that. She recommended some sort of specifics around what you could still accomplish, like being a participant in a research study, helping us, potentially find the next treatment for HD, or like setting an example for other family members who may be at risk about what it looks like to have HD. And then the last member of our team I'll talk about is our psychiatrist, so sort of the psychopharmacology side of things, medicine side of things. This is a busy slide. Again, the details don't matter too much, mostly just to say there are some medicines that can be helpful to try to treat apathy on its own. All of these medicines have potential side effects, so usually we try managing things through sort of behavior modification and scheduling and the other things that we reviewed. But in more severe cases, there are medicines that we use that can be helpful. And the different medicines sort of go target these different systems, like the reward system using dopamine-containing medicines, or if people do have mood symptoms along with their apathy, trying to treat those, et cetera. So that's my overview of apathy. Thank you all so much, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Lots of time for questions. Who has a question? Front row here.
Does it happen, or is it common that you have behavioral symptoms without cognitive or movement symptoms? And if so, how do you know that it's Huntington's disease causing, or is it, just an irritable person or personality traits? And how do you know?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a tricky question too. So the answer is yes. The motor symptoms, cognitive symptoms, behavioral symptoms can appear on their own, and different people may experience one or the other first. It's hard to know, and the behavioral symptoms specifically are sort of the least specific for HD. So some, depression and anxiety is just so common in humans. So changes in mood are sort of the hardest to know if that indicates a relationship to Huntington's or not. So for diagnosis of Huntington's disease, cognitive and motor symptoms are part of how we make the diagnosis, but mood, emotional symptoms are not, because they're so common in people and sort of the least specific. If that answers.
That being said, I think there definitely are people that we all know that have sort of mood and behavioral symptoms that are probably out of the norm and not like their normal personality, that do become like a presenting symptom of Huntington's disease. But Erin is completely right. It's very hard to know, whether it's Huntington's disease or not, especially for things like depression and anxiety. So, absolutely. I promise I'm just going to keep working my way back.
In the long-term care setting, when someone has a primary diagnosis of a psych diagnosis with mental illness, but they are not positive for HD, and they have behavior escalation, and then you have a resident who is HD positive, and as the disease progresses and the behaviors increase and the delusions and what you were speaking of as well, are you finding if there's any difference between the behavioral health psych diagnosis, negative HD, and the positive HD with increased behaviors? Is there different medications that work better for the HD person, or is it just the umbrella of the medication that works for both?
I mean, I can start with that. Ultimately, if you're dealing with someone else who's in a care facility that has behavioral problems, those behavioral problems are probably due to something, whether they're Alzheimer's disease or some other behavioral disorder. And yes, there can be medicines that are, say, helpful in Alzheimer's disease that are not in Huntington's disease. The acetylcholinesterase inhibitors are a good example of that, like Aricept or donepezil and those kinds of things are not helpful in Huntington's disease, but they are helpful in Alzheimer's disease. But however, most of the kind of symptomatic treatment of behavioral issues is less specific. We don't have Huntington's specific therapies that are going to work better in Huntington's disease, in my experience. I don't know.
Yeah, same. It's the same, and right, we're both not psychiatrists, but it's the same group of medicines that would be used in either population. Yep.
Second row, going back.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I take care of two young boys. One is 7 and one is 12. We are not sure if they have Huntington's yet or not. They have not been tested. My question is the change of routine. Both of them go absolutely bonkers when we change the routine. And we could change it days ahead of time and it'll still be a complete outburst. Are there maybe some ways that might help with that?
That's a tough one, yeah. I guess routine is honestly something that can be quite helpful to kind of establish a routine for the day. However, breaking that routine, that's where it gets tough, right? And life happens. You can't always do things exactly the same way every day. Now, in this, the situation that you're describing, whether or not it's due to Huntington's disease, I guess we don't know, right? These are children. It's likely that all kids have some difficulty coming outside of routine. So,
They have a lot of
sounds, yeah, okay. So there are probably a lot of factors involved. Okay.
Maybe giving them some control, like
I like
we're
it.
gonna do this.
No, yeah, this is awesome. You can answer. Sorry.
Maybe giving them some control.
I'll repeat it.
For example, okay, we're gonna go do this activity today instead of our normal routine. While we're there, do you want to have this snack or this snack?
Yes, I like that. So what she says, giving them control, giving them choices, so that kind of gives them some agency. So yes, this is great. You guys can help. All right. Other questions? Yes.
Sorry if this if it's too close. I'll stand over here. Okay, that's better. Yeah, less dangerous that way. Sorry, damn it. Okay, so I have HD, obviously. Sorry. Anyhow, and so recently diagnosed, I guess, 42. I have it's been about 2 years, really. It's not that recent, but it feels like it was yesterday. So on apathy, I used to have a very good work ethic. I used to do well at work and school, and I always got great grades in school. I did well, and bragging only because now I have a hard time motivating myself. But then maybe this is unique to me, but I feel like I'm missing something. Yeah, at the end of the day, if I don't do something else, because we have a lot of things to do around in my area. There's places to go, places to fish. I live near the coast, but now I want to go everywhere. And I feel like I'm lazy on some level that I haven't gone to all these cool new places nearby. That's my twist. Sorry. Thanks.
That's great. We'd be happy to hear from other folks too about your own experience with these. And I know there are people from other centers of excellence too. So we're hoping to make this sort of more of a conversation than just Q&A necessarily. Thank you.
I'm making my way back.
So my mother is potentially early stage. We're still kind of working through it with our care team, but she is very irritable and apathetic towards everything, and she just lost her job, so all she does is watch TV and won't apply to jobs and all these things. But she's unaware of how it's impacting her. And of course, it's impacting me and my father, and we're trying to pose questions to her like, hey, do you want to go do this? Do you want to go do that? And it's always no. Do you have any ideas on how to introduce the fact that she may be apathetic to her to bring some self-awareness, because she's not? And if so, what would that might be?
That's a great question. It's tricky. It sort of falls into another symptom, which is called anosognosia, sort of the fancy term for being unaware of your own symptoms, which adds another layer of complexity onto already challenging symptoms. So irritability and apathy, even if you're aware of them and you're trying to fight back on your own, to also not be aware of it makes it really hard. I think, we often will try explaining that concept to patients. So, just trying to sort of walk someone through the thought experiment of, like, what if one of your symptoms made you unable to recognize you had a symptom? Can you just sort of like walk through this with me? What would that be like? And then how could I help you? If you had that, how could I help you sort of navigate it? And maybe they can sort of help you brainstorm ways to help.
Yeah, and baby steps, right? So small things at a time. Try to say, these are, explain to them, these are the things that we're seeing. Can we get you out of the house for this event? Or like you were talking about, maybe not necessarily getting out of your pajamas, but getting out of the house, right? Those kind of things. So that's another strategy. Yes, questions or answers for previous questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I have a patient who exhibits physical symptoms that we have explored and explored and explored, and can't really seem to come to any conclusion about that as to being a physical problem. So we think it's anxiety, but we're not really sure. And I was just wondering if you had any experience with patients like that and how you might handle that.
Yeah, so certainly the brain is a funny thing, right? We all have circuits in our brain that tell us something is touching me here, or I have a circuit that says I'm going to move my arm, and those can get activated in error. And these are kind of fall under the umbrella of what we call functional neurologic disorders. I wonder if that's a little bit about what your patient might be experiencing. How do we modulate that? How do we kind of treat those kind of things? The most effective treatment is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a way for the patient to kind of take stock of this are the things that I'm feeling, and kind of why am I feeling that? Are there triggers for that? How can I kind of understand these processes that are going on in my mind? Sometimes biofeedback is used as well. So that's potentially one thought. I don't know, Aaron, do you have other?
Yeah, I think also, depending on sort of what the symptom is, working with a therapist who specializes in it. So even if you haven't identified the cause, if it's like stuttering speech or something like that, working with a speech therapist, or if it's like pain in a certain body part, working with a physical therapist to work on that body part can sometimes be really helpful too. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to switch to this side.
I live in a state and work in the Center of Excellence, and we've recently legalized marijuana medically. So I'm getting all these calls from families saying, can we use this? Will it help? Will you give us prescriptions? But I can't find any hard data to go one way or the other. So I wondered if there were maybe other people that have used marijuana and it can give us some feedback, or if y'all had some experience with it, because we don't know.
I'll let you take this one.
It can be a little bit of a polarizing.
Have you used marijuana, Dr.
I have patients who, we've seen, so we do have, it's legal recreationally in states around us and then medically in Pennsylvania. So we have a good bit of experience with it. I think we've seen it go both ways, to be honest with you. So we have some patients who find it useful for, like, on the irritability side, so anxiety, irritability, sleep troubles, pain sometimes it can be helpful for. Not particularly helpful on the apathy side, as you might imagine. But for irritability, sometimes we have, because it can work quite well for anxiety, sometimes it can interact poorly with some other Huntington symptoms, and people can end up using it too much. So people sort of start using it a bit compulsively, and as soon as it starts to wear off, they sort of feel that change and then want to take it again. And we have seen a number of people sort of get into trouble that way, that it mostly just becomes very expensive and sort of limiting. So I think it can be really helpful, but it has to be used pretty carefully and in the right people.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. I think you have to watch for the potential cognitive side effects, which are certainly there. But in certain situations, in my experience, I've seen it be helpful in anxiety. So, yeah. Okay.
I think balance is the other one I always think about too, is if people get intoxicated from it, it can really throw off your balance.
So on the apathy issue, what medications do you recommend for apathy? And I mean, I just have a whole bunch to piggyback off of everything else, but yeah, that was my question initially.
Yeah, so there are sort of different categories of medicines that we use. I think they all have potential downsides, so we usually try not using them. The first would be to look for anything else that could be contributing that we know is more easily treated. So if people do have low mood or anxiety, to try to treat those things. If people have sleep dysfunction and sort of fatigue is at play, trying to improve the quality of their sleep so they're more wakeful during the day and have sort of more of that internal motivation can be helpful. So sort of trying to look and bolster other systems that might have an impact. The category of medicines we use have had the most success with are medicines that work on the dopamine system in one way or another. So sometimes we'll try medicines called dopamine agonists, so sort of work to stimulate dopamine, which we've had success with a few times. Some people will use stimulant medications like Ritalin, methylphenidate, that's used in like ADHD. But we usually try to avoid those, mostly because they can worsen irritability, they can worsen apathy. It would really have to be in sort of the right patient, because they're more likely sort of to cause new problems than they are to fix other ones.
Yeah. What's your experience with using SSRIs? So obviously if apathy is a part of a depression complex, sometimes I've found that helpful, but not always, right? Because as you were saying, apathy can be totally separate from depression.
Right. Yes, definitely. So we often try treating, we'll often try SSRIs or SNRIs, medicines like venlafaxine, that have sort of a little bit more of a mixed mechanism. So at higher doses, they're also a little bit stimulating, so they help treat depression, but also at higher doses can sort of add a little stimulation to the system, which can help.
Did you say you had another piggyback question, or you're?
Would bupropion be appropriate?
So that's on the list too, yep. So that's sort of, it's in its own category, but sort of works similar to this group SNRI. So it's both an antidepressant, but it's also a little bit stimulating. So it's sort of it's a good, sort of a mild stimulant. So it both boosts mood and gives people a little energy. So yep, for sure, that's a medicine we use.
Apathy so bad that you're just apathy and agnosia to where they're refusing treatment like therapy, and they're not doing anything to keep themselves safe, and it's just snowballing. They're not doing, they're not participating, they're falling down the stairs, they don't care about their safety. Well, I have that too, but I have a person who's like just, she won't do anything to take care of herself. She's just eating and then shopping, but she won't shower, she won't, and I know that's not a major issue in the grand scheme of things, but she's like making poor choices as far as she won't walk, she wants to be catered to, she's not doing anything for herself when she can. She's going to choke on her food purposely. She's just like, not purposely, but there's just so many things, and it's just becoming, she is becoming to the point where it is long-term care for her. And
Yeah.
she's only 35.
Oh man, really challenging. Yeah. I think you do sort of you do the best you can, and I think part of it is, putting the external systems in place. So that can be small things. Sometimes like a calendar of events can be helpful, but sometimes it has to be more significant structure like long-term care facility or...
And sometimes they'll do things for other people rather than family.
Is that?
I was just going to comment.
Yeah, no, I think what other solutions, because there's a lot of families in this room that probably are having exactly the same kind of thing that you're experiencing.
Well, I would just say for us, long-term care kind of solved a lot of the problems. We had all of that same not taking care of yourself and getting her into long-term care. Now she has friends, and she has a routine, and she has structure, and there's different caretakers, but it has really, really helped. Now, not all long-term care facilities are great, and you really have to look for the right one. But we have a great one in Cincinnati called the Beechwood Home that takes Medicare and Medicaid. So, yeah.
She's done much better.
Yeah, she's doing much better. This is her neurologist.
Hi, I think along the same lines, I was just curious if you had any experience with the HD patient that has some of the similar characteristics that she said, but also is substance and alcohol abuse, and because of the unawareness doesn't think he has a problem at all, and can like go for a week or two without a drink, but then ends up in the binge drinking, and so he's still trying to live alone, but really not taking care of himself at all. Any experience with that? Or?
Yes, certainly experience with that. Solutions, tough, right? You can't always help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. And all that you can do is be there for them and be supportive for them to an extent. But I don't know, what suggestions did the crowd have? You guys have dealt with these kind of things before as well. really, sometimes it gets to the point where they get into trouble enough that they end up, crossing a line and getting arrested and things like that. And sometimes a bottoming out can help to rebuild, but you can't always make that decision for them. You can't.
I would say also, it's kind of a little late if they're already at that point, but for those that are not yet, to already put in place for the power of attorney and healthcare agency for like their spouse or someone in the family that they trust can take care of that, because at some point it's too far along that it's hard to get those that paperwork in place after the fact. So that's just a suggestion.
And to also add, if they can go time without drinking, I try to always encourage, because I have alcoholism and substance abuse in my family, substance-free events. I try to go out during the day to do things with them, and then while we're together, I always make a point we're having a great time, we're doing this and that. And then if they binge and they're recovering, it's oh man, you really don't feel great, do you? And it sounds so silly, but it has reduced my parents drinking a lot. And they do not drink at family functions nearly as much, because I also don't drink as much at family functions. And so if you're trying to reduce them, you can also work creating a community to encourage them to also not drink as much. It's silly, but it works.
I just want to comment, you just have to be careful with that, because you can sound passive aggressive and you can end up having them shut down. Because we have a lot of people in our family that have shut down, but they're all coming back, so it's awesome. But you just really have to have a good support system, and one thing at a time. Because if they have the Huntington's and substance abuse and they're not ready to take care of themselves, they have to get themselves situated first before they're going to be ready for these kind of events or to go to family functions or ready to talk about it. We have one sibling who's probably has it but doesn't want to deal with it or come to the events or anything. And then we have one that, was going to come and then freaked out last minute. But all of our families here dealing with this, but we're not upset. We know every single person in our family is dealing with it on their own way. And we're all here together now and ready to take care of each other. So just be patient with each other, because it's a lot. And I literally, when I found out I had it, I was very happy because I'm a very optimistic person. But I completely shut down about it too. So, but we're here now. Yeah.
I just want to say about going to prison as being, the final thing that will get their attention. In my case, my daughter went to prison went to jail, and was declared cognitively unable to stand trial. So didn't solve a thing.
Other questions? We have a few more minutes. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm going to sit down because I have HD and I fall over a lot, so it's better. Okay. Do you want to hold this for my mouth? Because otherwise I'm going to hit myself with it, right? Yes. Okay. So I have HD, and I'm the last of my family. Everybody's passed away that's had it, and so I'm here by myself. But I just have some words of encouragement, because I used to be a really good speaker. I was a hygienist, sociable, OCD, and now, I'm a hot mess. But it's fun, right? Not worried so much. But I think that what happens to some of us, for me, is being the age, because I found out I was 23 4 when I was diagnosed with the gene, and then my onset was a little earlier than, they wanted. And I think what makes people really have to think about this age group is you're all supposed to be working. We're like supposed to be moms, right? Like, it's really disappointing to miss things, and then you want to be there because you want to be there for the last moments. But what I've found that's the best thing is to have someone that will talk to you, that understands. Like maybe you find someone else that has HD, right? That's your age or younger, older, but has your energy or a better energy where they can lift you up. And then you can talk to them, like, because they're not judging you because they're going through the same thing. Do you know what I mean? They can't remember to do anything, or if they can drive. But I found with my friends that have HD, I've stayed friends with them for 20-some years. And, and now we're still more active, but you still have that person to talk to. So, and that's what I found is that kind of community people for me. So I'm not the greatest speaker, but that's kind of the point I was going.
You actually are. Thank you. I can't think of a better way to end it than that, honestly. Thank you.